In 1939, after the successful launch of DC Comics' Superman a year earlier, the publishers turned their attentions to an altogether different take on the superhero. Created by Bob Kane, he was everything that Superman was not: dark, scary, brooding, and human. An instant success after his debut in Detective Comics 27, people were clamouring for more and more of the character. He quickly made his way into newspaper comic strips, books, radio dramas, cinema, television, and more recently, a stage show. The impact that the character has had on popular culture is immeasurable. It would be impossible to distill such a rich history down into one programme without neglecting much of what has allowed him to endure throughout the last 76 years. This film will look only at the cinematic legacy of the man that some call the Winged Avenger, the Caped Crusader, or the Dark Knight, but most will know him simply as Batman.
Now that's all right, Alfred. Snap into it. They may be here any time.
Oh, yeah. But it's only 9 o'clock, sir.
I know, but they might be here ahead of time to catch us napping. Get ready to do your stuff.
In 1943, at the height of the Second World War, Batman made his way to the big screen for the very first time in a 15-part serial starring Lewis Wilson as the masked vigilante, or in this case, due to some input by the film censors, a deputised agent of the law. Simply titled Batman, this serial also starred J. Carrol Naish as the Japanese master villain Dr. Daka, a character not previously seen in the comics. During this time, cinema attendance was the highest it had been since 1930, a direct result of the hard times people had fallen into, caused by the war effort. The cinema offered a place where people could go to get out of the nasty weather and escape to another world, away from the realities of life. This was the perfect time for Batman to hit the big screen and become a household name. Now terribly dated, this serial suffers from an inherent racism that reflects the American culture of the time, a culture at war with both Germany and Japan.
I am Dr. Daka, humble servant of His Majesty Hirohito. By divine destiny, my country shall destroy the democratic forces of evil in the United States.
Also lacking in budget, the film has no real gadgets for the dynamic duo. Instead of a Batmobile, we get a black Cadillac. The film can, however, be credited for changing the look of Bruce Wayne's butler, Alfred, in the comic books. In this film, he is played by William Austin, a tall, slender man with a thin moustache, quite different to the portly gentleman who had previously been drawn in the pages of Detective Comics and Batman. Directed by Lambert Hillier, a man with over 160 directing credits to his name, the serial was a box office smash, paving the way for a sequel that would arrive 6 years later in 1949. Batman and Robin, directed by Spencer Bennett and starring Robert Lowery as Batman and Johnny Duncan as Robin, saw the dynamic duo going up against a villain named the Wizard. With the war over, there was no longer any need to ride the propaganda train of the first film, and so the Wizard was a villain rooted more in the fantastical realm of comic book style villainy. However, this serial is widely considered to be something of a step down from the original, the lack of any kind of social commentary, no matter how racist it may be, making the film less interesting. This serial is also notable for the first on-screen portrayal of Vicky Vale, a character that would later be played in the 1989 film by Kim Basinger. Originally Kirk Alyn, who had previously starred as the Man of Steel in Columbia's Superman serials, was cast as Batman, even being fitted for the costume during pre-production. This costume is the one that was worn by Lowery, which is why it is often criticised for not fitting the actor too well. This was just one example of the many ways in which the filmmakers tried to save money on what was already a very tight budget. After Batman and Robin, the Caped Crusaders would not appear on the big screen again until 17 years later, with the release of Batman the Movie in 1966.
You to brace yourselves for big news.
The biggest.
Tell them, Robin.
Holy superlatives, Batman!
This film was a spin-off from the extremely popular High Camp television show. Originally intended to go into production before the first season of the TV show and act as a springboard for that series, the film was put on hold due to some scheduling issues and ended up being released in cinemas between seasons 1 and 2. As it happens, the series became so popular that it only added to the success of the big screen outing. Starring Adam West as Batman and Burt Ward as Robin the Boy Wonder, the film left an indelible impression not only on pop culture, but on Batman as a whole.
You pull on the mask and the utility belt, the gloves, and you must believe that you really are Batman.
The character became synonymous with bright colours, over-the-top characters and ridiculous set pieces that would define the character for generations to come, making it almost impossible for anyone to take any mention of the character seriously. In the comic books, it took nearly 20 years for DC Comics to regain the reputation of Batman as a Dark Avenger, helped in no small part to the release of the seminal works by Frank Miller, The Dark Knight Returns and Batman Year One. Nevertheless, for many people, their journey with Batman on the big screen began with Adam West, and it was not until 1989 that cinema would give us a much darker interpretation of the character, from Gothic filmmaker Tim Burton. When it was announced that Burton's Batman would be played by comedian Michael Keaton, fresh from his role as Beetlejuice in a previous collaboration with Burton, the modern-day fans of the comic book character feared the worst, expecting Batman to be taken back to the flamboyant interpretation of the 60s that, in their eyes, had strayed too far from the dark roots of Bob Kane's original vision. So great was the outcry at this casting that comic book fans petitioned Warner Brothers to take Keaton off the movie, with over 50,000 letters of protest being sent to the studio. But Burton's choice for The Dark Knight paid off when Batman became the highest grossing film of 1989, earning Jack Nicholson a $60 million payday as the nefarious Joker. Instead of a salary, Nicholson had opted instead for a percentage of the film's overall gross. He later claimed that he knew how successful the film was going to be. In spite of this, he had hesitated at taking on the role, and Warner Brothers lined Robin Williams up to take it, simply as a way of coaxing Nicholson into it. Williams was so upset over the way he had been treated that he refused to work for Warner Brothers again until they had apologised, even turning down the role of the Riddler in Batman Forever in 1995. The film was the first Batman film to win an Academy Award, in this case for art direction and set decoration, by Anton Furst and Peter Young.
To Tim, obviously, to John and Peter for their incredibly competent and wonderful spirit.
Sadly, Furst later committed suicide in 1991. With the monumental success of Burton's Batman, the director was asked to return for the sequel, Batman Returns, which was released in 1992. Burton was practically given free rein to make the film he wanted, and audiences were presented with the most gothic version of the character they are ever likely to see. With Keaton returning as Batman, Michelle Pfeiffer on board as Catwoman, and Danny DeVito as the hideous Penguin, this was a film about freaks. However, in typical Burton fashion, it is the freaks in the film that we are most allowed to sympathise with, the Penguin having been abandoned at birth, and Selina having been abused by her boss in her daytime job as a secretary. The true villain of the piece is Max Schreck, the aforementioned abuser of Selina and the man who manipulates the Penguin, played by Christopher Walken. Schreck is a villain created specifically for the film, having never appeared in the comic books. The character was written into the screenplay by Daniel Waters, writer of Heathers, when he replaced original writer Sam Hamm at Burton's request. Waters changed Hamm's story to give it more of a satirical edge, adding the plot of the Penguin running for office, which he later revealed was inspired by a couple of episodes from the 60s TV series. While much inspiration may have been drawn from the colourful Adam West TV show, audiences failed to see any resemblance, and the film failed to bring in the same kind of numbers as the first film, even earning Danny DeVito a nomination at the Razzie Awards for Worst Supporting Actor. This is perhaps unfair given given DeVito's commitment to the role. During the scene in which he's pelted with eggs and tomatoes, the actor refused a stand-in. He also ate a raw fish on camera and stayed in character between takes. Pfeiffer too showed a real commitment to her role, going through extensive whip and martial arts training, as well as wearing a vacuum-sealed costume that would cause her to almost pass out on multiple occasions.
She is doing things with the whip that will make Indiana Jones green, that 90% of the people who do this for a profession can't do.
Despite such commitment, the bleak colour palette and ghoulish characters of Batman Returns were blamed by the studio for the disappointing box office, even though the film made $266 million worldwide, more than tripling its production budget. Nevertheless, in the studio's eyes, the film was a failure, and Burton was asked to step down from the director's chair for the next live-action film in the franchise. But this was not before Batman would make his way to the big screen in an altogether different form: animation.